All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful framework, one that's designed to help us diagnose and maybe even treat some of the most timeless challenges that humanity has always faced. So, we have to start with a huge question, one that philosophers and thinkers have been wrestling with forever. What is really at the root of all the conflict and suffering in the world? What's the fundamental driver that leads to so much pain and division?
Well, the source we're diving into today offers a pretty clear diagnosis. It argues that the root of our most persistent problems can all be traced back to three big, interconnected flaws: ignorance, selfishness, and hatred. So let's dig into what each of those really means. Okay, so our first step here is to get a really clear definition of what this source means by each of these powerful and often really destructive concepts. First up is ignorance, but this framework defines it in a very specific and kind of challenging way. It's not just about, not knowing something. It's an active state. It's the willful, stubborn clinging to false ideas, even when all the evidence is staring you right in the face. And this idea of ignorance as a core problem, well, it's not new. It resonates across a lot of different traditions. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato, for instance, saw it pretty much the same way. He actually called it the mother of all vices. His logic was simple. If a person doesn't know what is right, how can they ever truly do what is right? Next up, selfishness. This is defined as that excessive focus on I, me, mine. It's that impulse to put your own needs, your own wants, and your own personal gains so far ahead of everybody else's that the well-being of the group or the whole community just becomes an afterthought. This view of our selfish nature also echoes pretty loudly in Western thought. The political philosopher Thomas Hobbes famously argued that if you strip away all the laws and rules that rein us in, our natural selfishness would just turn life into a brutal competition. Every person, a wolf to every other person. And finally, we have hatred. Now, this isn't described as just simple anger, which can flare up and then fade. This is a profound, deep-seated hostility. It's a truly destructive force that's aimed at completely rejecting and often harming its target, whether that's a single person, an entire community, or even an idea. Aristotle drew a really sharp line here that highlights the danger. He said that anger is often temporary. Maybe it wants payback. But hatred, he called it a timeless feeling. It doesn't want revenge. It wants its object to simply cease to exist. That's what makes it so uncompromising and so incredibly destructive. So we've got our three core flaws laid out. But the source argues their real danger isn't what they are in isolation. No, it's about how they feed off of each other. And here's the really critical insight. These are not three separate problems in three separate boxes. They actually form a toxic, self-reinforcing system. Each flaw enables and amplifies the others, creating this vicious downward spiral. Let's trace the connections. First, ignorance fuels hatred. It just makes sense, right? When we don't know or understand other people, it's incredibly easy to fall back on lazy stereotypes and fear. That lack of knowledge creates the perfect breeding ground for hostility to take root. At the same time, selfishness directly fuels ignorance. If you're completely absorbed with your own personal gain, what's the incentive to learn about anything that doesn't serve you directly? You effectively close yourself off from the world, choosing to be ignorant about anything that doesn't affect your bottom line. And then hatred comes along and completes this whole vicious cycle. It leads to isolation, it cuts people and groups off from each other. This just deepens the ignorance because dialogue becomes impossible. And it can even be used to justify selfishness, framing others as the enemy, to make it seem okay to take from them or harm them. So if that's the diagnosis, what's the prescription? Well, this framework doesn't just point out the problems. It provides a specific antidote for each one, drawn directly from the Quranic tradition. To combat ignorance, the antidote proposed is knowledge. The source emphasizes that the very first word of the Quran revealed to the Prophet Muhammad was Iqra, which means read. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a command. It places the act of seeking knowledge right at the foundation as the primary weapon against ignorance. For selfishness, the antidote is its polar opposite, altruism and charity.
the source highlights this really profound Quranic concept called ithar. Now, this isn't just about sharing what you have extra of. It means actively choosing to give to others, even when you yourself are in need. It's about preferring others over your own self.
And to fight hatred, the framework champions justice and mercy. This is captured so powerfully in a Quranic verse that basically instructs believers to not let their hatred for a people stop them from acting justly. The principle is just crystal clear. Your commitment to justice has to override your feelings of animosity. Always.
Okay, so how were these big ideals actually meant to be applied? This isn't just a philosophical list. It's designed to be a practical system for both individual and social change. And it's a whole system, not just one thing. The process starts with spiritual education, linking your behavior to a divine consciousness to build internal accountability. From there, it demands social justice, working to fix the unfairness that causes envy and strife. Then it pushes for dialogue, to break down those walls of ignorance. And finally, it uses acts of worship, like charity, as practical tools to actively purify yourself from selfishness and to build real empathy.
So finally, let's connect all these concepts to the world we live in today. What are the key takeaways from this framework that might be relevant for all of us? So what's the ultimate lesson here? This framework really insists that these ancient problems need active solutions right now. It champions education as the main tool against ignorance. It calls for deep empathy and community to counter selfishness. And it demands unwavering justice to dismantle hatred. But maybe the most powerful lesson of all is that these aren't separate battles. They're all interconnected, and they have to be fought together. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. As you look at the world around you right now, with all its complexities and all its conflicts, which one of these three, ignorance, selfishness, or hatred, do you believe is the main engine driving our biggest challenges today? It's a pretty powerful lens to look at our own times through.